Welcome to the AGA podcast, where we bring you small talk on big topics from within the world of gastroenterology. Thanks for being with us. Now let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the AGA podcast, Small Talk, Big Topics. I'm your host, Matthew Whitson, and today I'm with Nina Nandi. Hi, Dr. Nandi. How are you?
Hi, Matthew. Hi, everybody out there. We have a great podcast for you today. Today, we are joined by Dr. Sheryl Pfiel, who is a clinical professor in medicine and gastroenterologist at The Ohio State University's Wexner Medical Center. She is a big name in medical education, and also she runs the simulation lab over at The Ohio State University. She's won the Best Doctors in America Award, a Master Teacher Award, and the Leonard Tao Humanism in Medicine Award.
She's also going to be mortified that you just listed all of her accolades before we talk to her, but that's okay. We should do her justice because, as you and I both know, Sheryl Pfiel is absolutely amazing. Full disclosure, she serves as a mentor to me in the world of medical education. And honestly, she was one of the first people that came to my mind as to who we could get on this podcast. And I was just thrilled that she said yes. So in our conversation with her today, what are you excited to learn? What do you want to hear from her?
This is a topic that I'm very interested in medical education. And I'm really interested in her journey, how she decided to choose a career in medical education. I feel that in GI, there's so many paths you can go down: research, private practice, you can do advanced endoscopy. How did she pick education with so many options out there?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure what she's going to tell you. I think she's going to tell you it's a calling for her, but it'll be interesting to see what she's done over her career. She's been a program director. She's been director of the simulation study. She's been president of the AGA Academy of Educators. So she's done some local stuff, some national stuff. It should be a good discussion.
I'm interested to see who her mentors were and who were her guiding lights along the way.
Absolutely. So without further ado, let's get into it. This is our conversation with Dr. Sheryl Pfiel.
So Dr. Pfiel, if you don't mind, I was wondering if you could tell all of us how you actually got into a career in medical education.
Well, hi, Nina and Matt. It is so nice to join you tonight. I have to say, when I think about my career as an educator, I think there was a bit of serendipity, and I don't think it was very intentional at the outset. I was a gastroenterology fellow at Case Western in Cleveland, Ohio, and finished my fellowship or was nearing completion of my fellowship, and did the usual interviewing at the various practices, and had, a whole list of practices on my plate as I was trying to consider what my, initial career for I would be, and nothing really felt exactly right. And then my chief at the time actually called me in and said, "Hey, would you ever consider staying here?" And I kind of paused for a minute and I said, "Well, what would I do?" And he said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I had to, pause myself again and say, gosh, I'd really never done the soul searching to really think about it. And so he said, "I've observed that when you are teaching the students, you really seem to come into your own and you really enjoy it." And I said, "Frankly, I do. But I never really envisioned that you could sort of make a career of educating and being a clinical gastroenterologist." So that was my start. And of course, like many of us who educate, once you're in, you're in. And my chief was right. He had the insight that I didn't have. And I've really enjoyed having part of my professional identity be an educator ever since.
So just for context for the audience, what is your title now? And what roles do you have at this time? Because as we kind of explore your journey, I kind of want them to have the end point now.
Yeah. So I'm a professor of clinical medicine. I still consider myself a gastroenterologist. I still wear, the clinical hat of gastroenterologist. And I am the medical director of the Clinical Simulation Center, which is a center that serves the medical center and the College of Medicine and the other health science colleges. And then I do I have other roles at the College of Medicine, primarily at the student level. I was previously a gastroenterology fellowship program director for 10 years, and that was also a role that I enjoyed. But those are my current roles.
That's so what you're saying is the offshoot conversation with your chief and then you taking it and running with it has led to this extensive career within education?
Yeah, I mean, it really has. And I think that that's I mean, I think sometimes our attendings and our teachers and so forth, sometimes our parents, they have a certain insight that maybe we're not seeing ourselves and can recognize a spark or something and kind of put that out there. And yeah, that was something that I think I hadn't realized was really something that I wanted to do. So yeah, and I've enjoyed being an educator ever since.
Besides your chief, did you have other mentors and teachers along the way who helped shape and guide your career, people that you could rely on?
Oh my goodness. I think that, like too numerous to count, right? I think,
TNTC.
yeah, right, right. I think what drew me to medicine actually was one of my first attendings, or what drew me to GI was one of my first attendings who was just out of his fellowship at Hopkins, and he was a little dynamo and just loved endoscopy, loved acuity and GI, found every single thing exciting and interesting and novel. And I thought, gosh, I want to be him. I mean, this is just like, this is so cool. And so I think that was a very, pivotal role model, if you will. And he loved trainees. And I think that, many of us would say, you guys probably say the same thing, that those teachers that validate the students, that take an interest in students, learners of any sort, right? Doesn't matter if it's intern, resident, fellow, that sort of basically care. Um, I think are the ones that, we draw most energy from. So, and I've had many, many of those.
Absolutely. So now I'm sure about hundreds of your mentees would say the same thing about you. But when in your career do you think kind of the light bulb went off or the switch went on and you said, "Oh, I could do this as part of my career or as a huge part of my career."
I think that it was something that sort of happened gradually. As I stayed in academics, I realized that, my hat wasn't going to be the research hat. And I really embraced certainly clinical medicine, but also the teaching aspect. And then beyond that, kind of the zoom up of the organization of education. And so I think I had some opportunities and I decided to, like the opposite of the Nike commercial, just say yes, kind of go with it, see how it went. Um, and I enjoyed it. I realized I could sort of get out of my own shop, so to speak, and, do something in the doctoring course, which was a course that I led for a time, or, do something with student coaching or, whatever manner of other things are sort of like outside of my own shop. And I realized that there's a whole additional aspect of medical education that is not within our own specialty. And it's the two aren't mutually exclusive.
So that actually kind of leads us into like one of the other things we wanted to talk about with you is that, as a gastroenterologist, I think a lot of us view education as I will teach this trainee how to scope.
Mhm.
I will teach them about diverticulosis or achalasia or whatever. So could you kind of walk us through maybe some of the areas in medical education careers that we may not accept, like we as a larger community may not expect or see as like the first line and area to explore within education?
Sure. So I do think that teaching within our own field is sort of the natural first step, because there are some people that just really enjoy that, right? Really relish it, really enjoy when the light bulb comes on for a learner, right? That's just such an invigorating moment for us all. So I think that that's the first place to start. And then I think that there are other opportunities. Now, it sort of used to be more bucketed. So it was either like resident fellow education or student education.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of crossover now. On the student education side, some of the early sort of rungs of the ladder might be things like participating as a teacher in a course that might be a doctoring course or a skills based course, clinical skills course, or something that sort of takes you out of your field a bit and lets you try that type of teaching. And then there are other leadership positions that come along. And I think you have to be courageous. If something seems to be of interest, remember that there are certainly many individuals who are program directors of internal medicine residency programs, other areas of leadership that are not within GI, but yet they started as a gastroenterologist. And you can actually sort of rise in academic medicine to, I can name, senior associate dean, program director of medicine, even department chair of internal medicine. So I can name a lot of individuals who actually are gastroenterologists, but who have done, really great and amazing things in education. But many of them, I think, started small. And then there's a whole other area of organizations and associations and meetings, networking, and so forth that are not specially related, but are within the area of education. And a huge crossover between the two. So within the last in-person DDW, which seems so long ago now.
Yeah.
So Matt, you know very well, there's a whole section for education, right?
I do know this very well. Full disclosure, as you and I have served on one of these committees for the AGA Academy of Educators. I feel like that's a disclosure we're supposed to make. Like that should be our opening slide. So, but yeah, no, I mean, last DDW in, I guess that was 2019. I mean, it was Danielle Marino and Bridget Shaw were leading tours of all the medical education studies. There was really a nice community that they were helping to build that it feels inclusive, I guess.
Absolutely. And there's a separate poster section actually for education. And I think the Academy of Educators is another really nice opportunity within our field, because there's actually a sort of not a C grant, but an early grant opportunity for individuals who are wanting to study something that is education related. So the Academy of Educators has grants each year and a plenary session, and it's wonderful networking. Most people in education are really nice. Not everybody, but most of the time.
You're not speaking about you or I, correct?
Right.
Nina, you can attest to this. We're both okay?
You're both great. Fabulous.
Most of the time, it's a very collegial group.
Are these something that early career individuals can apply for? People in fellowship, can they apply for an AGA Academy of Educators grant?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, they can. Mm-hmm. And early career. And I think that it's really well suited. And to be honest, education research doesn't usually cost a lot of money. There's sometimes some supplies or some statistical support, but for the most part, it is the labor which is ours, and that is not something that is a direct cost. So it doesn't cost a lot of money. The grants aren't for a lot of money, but I think it's incredibly energizing to receive one of these, and then it comes with actually an opportunity to present at DDW. We're recreating that in a virtual way now. It's also a very important opportunity for others to hear about what you're doing and so forth. So I think it's a good start.
So can I ask, can we pull on that thread for a second where, when you think about thought leaders in a field like IBD, you might think of like Sanborn or Bruce Sands or someone that is doing you're doing these tons of studies and they're pioneering research. You think of pelvic floor disorder, Satish Rao immediately comes to mind. Where do you see the role of scholarship within medical education? Because I feel like that's something that does sometimes get lost, and it's worth really maybe digging in an extra step to talk about that.
I think that's really important. So if you want to sort of, hold yourself out as a medical educator, especially, in an academic environment, scholarship is really important. But it doesn't have to be separate from your clinical work. Actually, you can find opportunities to intertwine teaching and education with what you're doing every day. But I think that it is really important to remember there's an obligation to create scholarly work, to disseminate what you're doing. And that's every bit as important in education as it is in any other clinical niche.
I suppose along the same lines, how does the role of mentorship fall into that category? How do you balance education with scholarship and then mentorship?
Yeah, so sometimes they can be very closely linked. So I have trainees or early faculty members who will come and want to discuss an idea, bounce an idea off me, enlist my help and support in moving a project forward. And so sometimes mentorship and scholarship can be very closely intertwined. Other times they're just mentorship for mentorship, and that's perfectly exciting as well.
So in education, Sheryl, where do you view potential mentors from? You mentioned earlier that there's a lot of crosstalk between residency and medical school, probably within different fields within medicine, whether it's internal medicine or GI or another subspecialty. I would imagine that also extends to other programs.
Yeah. So I realized when I was putting together my promotion packet, I realized that my external letters weren't all going to come from gastroenterologists. They were going to come from other educators that might be in different fields because they knew best of some of the aspects of what I did. And some things, of course, some of the letters, of course, would come from my fellow gastroenterologists who are in education. But I think that it's really amazing because my mentors have completely expanded. I mean, certainly I have wonderful, mentors and role models within GI, and I try to and peers and certainly others that I am trying to do the same for who are my junior, right? But I also will say that I have I've been so fortunate to have many mentors and role models, folks who have supported me and advocated for my career who are in completely different fields. And I think, one thing is when you attend, and gosh, I certainly hope we can attend these in person again, but whether it's virtually or in person, just taking that extra effort to make those connections. And you have to be a little courageous. And you might be an introvert with a capital I. I think that I probably am a native introvert, but you just have to go up and meet folks. And, I always say, what's the worst thing that can happen? Well, they can give you the cold shoulder and then you won't have made the acquaintance. And, okay. And if you didn't go out and try to meet them and so forth, you would also have not made
Right.
their acquaintance. So, I remember I was new to a board and I was sitting around the table and I kind of snuck in there and I looked around for the least of the most unassuming, least threatening person I could see around the table. And I timidly asked if I could sit next to this woman who had a very kind look on her face. And she was very gracious and I swiveled my chair up and I thought I'd just try to stay invisible and not make any big mistakes during this meeting. And I sort of started to chat with a woman next to me and started a conversation. She was quite nice. And then as the meeting unfolded, I realized that she was the incoming president of the board.
Oh, wow.
Subsequently, she, received the Flexer Award, one of the highest awards in medicine, and she is still a dear friend to this day. She is now retired, but I still keep up with her. But she was an amazing supporter for me, amazing advocate, and I just kind of, was because she looked fairly, non-threatening. But I think, another woman I met, I literally is a woman who's actually she's an ophthalmologist at Penn, but we were wearing the same jacket. The same suit jacket at a national meeting, an education meeting. And I, walked up to her and just struck up a conversation because we happen to be wearing the same outfit. And as it turns out, she's, still a friend, a colleague, someone who I have, kept in touch with and continue to keep in touch with to this day. She's been a wonderful source of advice and support. She is much my senior in terms of stature and rank, but again, it was just by literally walking up and being brave enough to, and sometimes it's not so incidental. Sometimes it's because you're brave enough to say, hey, I love your research. Can I help you with that? What can I bring to the party? Not how can you help me? It's always good to have an attitude of what can I bring to the party? What can I do? Because there are things, even if you don't think there are, you might just have more time than they have, or you might have a willingness to just jump in and roll up your sleeves and be part of a project. So there's always something you can bring to the party. That's always a really good way to approach things.
It's interesting because you've mentioned bravery twice now in our conversation. Once when you talked about jumps in leadership or taking on a new role, maybe outside your comfort zone in your program or in your institution. And then you talked about it in terms of networking. So as a mentor, I know you're still a mentee and a collaborator, but as a mentor, how do you instill that bravery in your mentees or the people you're advocating for?
So sometimes if I identify a talent, I can certainly be their source of encouragement or support as they're contemplating trying for a new position, going for a new role. Sometimes I can open doors for them as well by advocating, suggesting their name, those kinds of things. And then I think sometimes I share my own story. And I can certainly tell you that I have not gotten everything I've applied for. And I always tell, my mentees that if you, and this is not my own quote, I can't remember, I don't know who to attribute this to, but if you get everything you apply for, that means you are not reaching high enough. And so you really have to kind of approach it with that mindset. I mean, and not just willy-nilly go after anything, but if you feel you're interested in something or bringing some qualifications to the table, if you don't reach at times, then, you're not going to have the opportunities. So I think you have to build a little bit of an alligator skin, and recognize that sometimes when you're turned down for a position, it may have to do with many things other than what you're bringing to the role. It may relate to many other things that they're seeking. So,
was there a leap in your career that was the most nerve-wracking jump that you had to make? And if so, what was the push that made you take that chance?
I suppose there were a couple. One, when I became the fellowship program director, because I didn't feel that I knew that I had a whole lot of knowledge of the ACGME, so all of the regulations that govern fellowship and residency training. And so I felt like I had a lot to learn. It wasn't a role that I was really seeking. It was a role that I was asked to assume. And so it was part interest, part intrigue, and part citizenship. I felt that it was something that I needed to do because I was the best positioned person to do it at that time. And then, so that was a leap, and I thoroughly enjoyed it for sure. And it's not easy work, but you're right, Matt. So, Matt.
Nope.
So I think that was a leap, and then I think the other leap was simulation, because that was really so far afield from what I was accustomed to doing. But the backstory on that was, I think I've told Matt this actually. The backstory on that was, I was the fellowship program director, and at that time, really, we were literally doing almost all the cases were conscious sedation or moderate sedation, and we would hand the fellow the scope with a patient that was, under conscious sedation, and that would be the fellow's, entree into learning how to handle the scope and how to begin their endoscopic learning. And I just kept thinking there has to be a better way. There has to be a endoscopy opportunity. And I remember learning about simulators. And at that time, really, I think they still have a limited role, but at that time they probably had even more limited role. But be that as it may, there was a GI bronchoscopy simulator kind of combo. And I really wanted to obtain that for the benefit of our fellows. But unfortunately, it was really high priced. And I talked to the surgeons, and I talked to actually pulmonary anesthesiology, GI. There was no way in the world that I could cobble together enough resources to purchase the simulator for the benefit of our fellows. And then Ohio State was building a simulation center, and I raised my hand virtually and stood in line virtually and said, I want to put in a request for this simulator. And it was well received. It was the first non-mannequin simulator that was purchased. And I wasn't so enamored with the simulator itself, but I was hooked on the concept of this aspect of education. And I think that there are many other, reasons why I continue to be involved in the area now, the collaboration, the interprofessional aspects and so forth. But that was why I took that leap. And I have to say that was a big leap, because I really was not very knowledgeable about simulation when I first entered the field.
So, Sheryl, as we move on to kind of one of our other big thematic things we wanted to talk to you about. So, one of our goals of this podcast is to really talk to people that are earlier in their careers, like associate professors, assistant professors, and then also trainees and even residents and students. So, if they have the inkling that medical education is something they want to explore, do you have first steps that they can follow, or who could they reach out into their institution?
Yeah, I would say to look to the people that are doing education first. So, look to the folks that are within your area that are doing education. Maybe it's the person who's running the student GI teaching block, right? They almost always are eager to have participants in terms of leaders for small groups or a micro lecture. The person who's leading the GI education also has their finger in the pot, so to speak, of the like clinical education, right? They're leading the clinical education of the students and residents who rotate through, and they're almost always interested in having help. And so I say, it's like anything, try it on. Like, you don't know if, you want to do anything until you sort of put the cloak on and see if it feels right to you. So I think that's the first step. And I think that's a pretty easy avenue, is to look to the people that are leading the local education and see what involvement you might have.
So, for those people that are working in smaller institutions where they may only have a handful of core faculty, you mentioned networking outside of your institution. I know you get tons of emails from potential mentees. How can people reach out to people they want to collaborate, or kind of potential mentors? Like, how can they do that? Should they feel comfortable just cold calling you guys?
So what I think works the best is if you read something that you think is really exciting, maybe somebody who's, done something in education, taught in a new way, found, evaluated in endoscopic training in a new way, whatever, you read something, you can almost always find the email address of the authors, and just drop a note and say, hey, saw this, very interesting, and make that first connection. It may go nowhere, but it might also be the start of a connection. And then if you have an in-person meeting, I've had folks emailing me in advance saying, I'm going to be at the DDW. I hope you are too. Could we arrange to have coffee? And I think, those are wonderful opportunities. You might even, if there is an in-person meeting, make plans to join the Academy of Educators. It was created really with an open model. So it is not a selective, kind of restrictive organization, but really one that welcomes early educators. So join that, talk to the folks who are there. They most always will share the same passion that you have for teaching education. And then, visit some posters, talk to the people at posters, go up to somebody who gives a great presentation, introduce yourself. These are great ways to kind of start. And like with anything, not every relationship will stick, but if somebody doesn't have time for you, even after a meeting, that's not necessarily the person that you're going to find valuable as a mentor. So, right. I mean, you want somebody who's going to be gracious and welcoming.
Absolutely. I mean, not everyone should be paired up. It's a little bit like, speed dating, I think.
Yeah. And then I would also say, for folks who want to educate, remember, even though you may feel like you have a lot of synergy with, the folks who are doing education, remember that it is the whole of your career, and you need to have a clinical focus, a clinical niche, as well as loving and embracing education. The two can be very simpatico, can be very synergistic. You can make it a win-win. You can, amplify your education work by what you're doing clinically. But to say your only area of expertise is education, probably not, enough as you're beginning a career now.
Do you have advice for mentees that, they may want to pursue a career in medical education, but then they also want to do research or basic science research, and they also want to do advanced, and they kind of seem like there's too many things that they're involved in, and they really need to kind of learn to narrow it down. How do they narrow it down? And I guess along the same lines, sometimes we are so enraptured with our mentors that we start to think that we want to do the things because our mentors are so passionate about that. For example, we have an awesome advanced endoscopy professor who's the chair of our department now, and he's just so excited about pancreatic stones that I started getting excited about it. And then I thought, do I really want to do this? But it was how do you kind of break away from that?
I mean, don't you think that that's a real sort of liability that we feel, we have of these very charismatic individuals, and sometimes it's really hard to separate, what they're doing from who they are.
Right.
And some of them, in the strengths finders, there's, one of the strengths, if you've ever done the strengths finders workshops and so forth, one of the strengths is woo, meaning sort of that charisma, or that ability to sort of draw people to your team. And I think that there are people certainly like that. And it can be very sort of captivating to want to follow in their path. And so I do think we have to just, be personally a bit aware of that, and recognize that who they are and what they do aren't, necessarily the same thing. I will also say that you don't have to be unilateral. So you don't have to be only an educator. And I will say that I have people who have said to me, and when I was first asked about this, it felt a little bit uncomfortable, but they said, I would like you to be my mentor. And I have like three others, um, other aspects of my career. And when I first heard this, I kind of felt a little bit affront. I was like,
Yeah.
I just, but then I realized actually that was the very, very wise mentee, right? Seeking a sort of counsel for the different aspects of their career. And that's a really appropriate thing to do. Now, I will also say that sometimes we've all seen this, but we see the medical student, for example, who goes through all the rotations and they're on surgery and they want to be a surgeon and then they're on teeth, they want to be a physician. And you kind of wonder, do they really know, have any idea about what they want to do? And I see the same thing with fellows. We have seen fellows who one day you talk with them, they're doing liver, the next day they're doing IBD, and the next day, it's pancreas. And I think that, it is, it's important as mentors to try to help individuals sort of seek their primary passion, not that they have to be unilateral. There is plenty of room for a diverse career. But on the other hand, if your career looks like Brownie in motion, right, where you're just bouncing all over the place like the balls in the box randomly, then you're not going to get to where you're going. So I think it is important to have some goals and have some focus, and then make your career thematic so that what you're doing actually is leading you somewhere and not just a random haphazard kind of walk in the park.
So, Nina, did you have Brownie in motion on your bingo card for our conversation with Sheryl?
Yes.
That was definitely
brownies in motion. I got hungry, so.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen people like that, right? Who just seem to bounce from, and I don't know if it's just because they have this wonderful personality that just finds everything interesting. But at the end of the day, they're in order to be successful, you have to have some element of focus.
That's a hard thing to do. It's hard to say goodbye to things that you do love or you really enjoy. I'll speak for myself here. It is a challenge to realize that, I can't do that anymore. I really have to zone in a little bit more with my limited time.
Yeah, I think one thing that's important is everything. So everybody has only 24 hours in a day and only a single plate. And if you want to add something more to the plate, then you really kind of have to think about what is it that I'm less passionate about that I could leave by the wayside in favor of this more interesting, more significant, job role opportunity. So maybe that helps a little bit.
I think it's tough because when you're in training, there's a set trajectory. I'm going to go to college, then I'm going to go to medical school, then I'm going to go to residency, and I'm going to go to fellowship. And all of a sudden, you're like, I'm going to go into a career. And that's so completely different. There's not a set syllabus of like, okay, we're going to cover X, Y, and Z, and you're out on your own and you kind of have to figure it out.
Yes, it's almost like the sort of that 20 something is just delayed, just gets kicked down the road, right? So instead of that, like, oh, now I've graduated from college and I have to figure out what to do with my life, which we see at that age. In medicine, it's kind of like delayed, and then we finish fellowship, and there isn't a lot of guidance necessarily to help us figure out kind of what to do. The one thing I will say is that there is more, I think there's more mobility now than I've ever seen in the past in terms of folks who decide to do something different along their career journey. There's more, don't you think, Matt, there's more like ability to transition from practice to academia or vice versa?
I think people are more open to it for sure. And I think, as you see practices kind of bought up by a lot of the large institutions, there are many pros and cons to that we're not going to dive into here. But bringing those clinicians back into the fold from an educator standpoint is wonderful for the trainees and the skill development they get from that community.
I think that we're all more similar than we realize because, I was actually thinking, who do I educate? And certainly there are formal roles. We actually happen to be in the midst of the GI block right now, so I can tell you I'm educating 200 medical students. But there also are other roles. I mean, every time I work with, endoscopy nurses, right, who are asking me questions and so forth. So I think we educate a lot of people, right? So I think there's a lot of education that we do sort of incidentally. Yeah. So I think there is a lot of overlap.
Do you think there are common attributes to educators?
I don't know. I would say for the most part, I think I was sort of looking around at some of the educators that I, cross paths with on a daily basis, and I was reflecting on the fact that I guess if I had to draw some generalizations, I'd say they're by and large a group that values like inclusivity, and they're pretty much a warm, collaborative group. They realize that they're just kind of one piece of the universe, and it would behoove them to work with the other pieces. So I think that that's a general common personality trait. But I don't know. I mean, I think the educators are as diverse as any other, niche in our careers, I guess. Do you think are there any unique qualities or?
Nina, what do you think?
I think that, I mean, at least people who are involved in education are very passionate. They're very inclusive. They want to make sure that this is touching all sorts of people and all sorts of
Thank
different
you for
kinds of
listening to
learners.
the
I think
AGA
they are very in
podcast.
tune to
reach us,
like
please
the BARC,
email us at
types of learning styles,
agapodcast@gastro.org
their
or
visual,
follow
read,
us on
write,
Twitter
kinesthetic.
at
So I think they
MJ
just have
MD,
knowledge
at
about all
Nina
these different
Nandy
things.
MD,
I remember
and
being
at
a TA,
CSC
and we
podcast
took a class
production
called
done by
Teaching with the
Resonant
Brain in
Recordings.
Mind, and
Don't
it kind
forget
of
to
talked
rate,
about different
review, and
learning
subscribe
styles. And we went to this
wherever you get your
alternative
podcast.
school.
Thanks
I
for
went to
listening,
Cornell, so it was
and
up
have
in
a good
Ithaca,
one.
New York. And there's this alternative school where they don't have grades, and kids are super, super smart. And we just kind of spent a day observing them and seeing how they learn and, who does what. And then we decided to teach them microbiology at a high school level. And we did like a kind of mystery microbe, figure out what it is. And they had to do like, gram stains and different, different things. And it was very cool. So I think that there's definitely a fun and, passion to it and wanting to communicate openly. I think that's what I've gotten out of my educators who I love.
Yeah, I think you're both right. I think the only other things I'd add, maybe inclusivity. I love Sheryl, by the way. I think that's so true. And I think that as you talked about sidling up to someone you weren't sure if they were important at the meeting and then ends up being the incoming president elect, I think that's hilarious because I think as an educators group, everyone is very inclusive. I think there's a component of empathy that's there. I think there's a component of patience for the most part that's there. I think there's some humor that's there as well because sometimes you're just banging your head against a wall and you have to be able to laugh at that moment. I think those are common threads I've seen, but maybe that's who I'm drawn to. I'm not sure.
I think that educators need to. So when you ask an educator, like, what's their biggest joy? They won't say something personal. They will deflect it to their learner. They will say, oh, I had a learner who came back to see me and now wants to do GI. Or they'll say, I had, a learner who I could see their eyes lit up and it was just this light bulb moment. And they were so enthusiastic they couldn't stop talking. They will say, I was working with a fellow who got to the seek and was ecstatic, and I touched the scope. They will deflect it onto the successes of their learners. And that's what fills the well of many educators. It's that, joy of doing something bigger than themselves.
I love that. I think that's one of the last things that we should end on today because that's wonderful advice. One of the things that we ask everyone as we're kind of winding down that I'm curious about in your career, which is, I'm going to say this word and you're going to laugh at me, a very successful career. I know you're shaking your head. No one can see it because it's a podcast, but I can see it. What is the best advice you got that really stuck with you and helped you to succeed?
Wow. I'd say a couple things. One is to sort of be confident in yourself, right? I mean, it's to know where you want to go. And I mean, sometimes when you strike out on a path of being an educator, you may not have all the encouragement as you would if you were, developing a new clinical program or something. So I think be confident in where you want to go and know that you have it within yourself to succeed. And the other thing I'll say, and I will say this from like very recent personal experience, as I'm currently a student as well, it's never stop being a learner yourself.
Yeah.
It makes you a better teacher. It keeps you in touch with your own learners. And plus, it's just plain fun. So those would be a couple things I guess I'd end on.
So along those lines, if you have a trainee who is really looking for a career in medical education, do they need any extra sort of training? Do they need another degree? Do they need, a master's in education? I know a lot of people must be asking about that.
Yeah, so these degrees and these master's degrees in health professions education, education of different, ilk, they're really becoming more prevalent now. And in fact, a lot of programs are almost exclusively or exclusively online. So they're more accessible. And so the question is always, do you need it to be an educator? And I think what happens is a lot of the early career faculty will look to more senior people and say, well, they don't have one, and look where they are. But I will also say that if you're just at the entry point of your career and want to be an educator, I do think it's something that, if nothing else, it shows your dedication to education. It says, you're willing to really do the work of exploring the theory and methods behind what we do and why we do it and so forth. So I think it's good. What I say is most programs will. So if you're already at a university, many universities actually have these programs that are very accessible and often have, a tuition waiver or offset. And many times you can take a course and kind of, try it out and see whether it's for you before you decide whether or not to enter a full program. Sometimes you can take even more than one course and then roll it into a program if you decide you want to actually apply to the degree program. So I can tell you a little bit from personal experience that I don't have a master's degree in an education field, but it is something that I'm surprisingly working towards. And that's because I was asked to teach a course in our master's program. And I realized that I didn't have a lot of, really credibility to do so, having not taken an online course myself and not having been a student for a lot of years. And so although I had a lot of knowledge about the content, it was a course on teaching with simulation, I didn't really have much knowledge as to where the students were coming from. And so I decided to embark on some courses myself. And I think it's been a really good experience, and I'm enjoying it and postponing that big thing with a capital T called thesis. But it's been a good run up until this point. I don't think I'll be able to escape without doing the thesis, but no, I think these degrees do bring value. I think they certainly are a mark of an individual's dedication towards being an educator. And I don't think it's all or none. I think you can try it out and see, and you never lose the fact that if nothing else, you took a course with a number on it in an education field, and if nothing else, that's certainly CV worthy.
I think that's really good advice, because I think a lot of people don't realize you can just kind of try something and you don't have to commit necessarily down that pathway. It's not an all or nothing like an action potential.
And that, different programs are different. So there may be some that do require you to, jump fully in and commit before you're able to sample any of the content. But I know that there are others that actually have a more open approach.
So Sheryl, let me ask you a question. So obviously, as you and I have discussed offline, I did my master's in medical education, right, earlier on, and maybe I fall into that group where hopefully we feel we need it for the future. So let's say someone's goals is just to become a better educator. What if you're the clinician that just wants to learn how to teach more effectively, wants to learn how to give feedback more effectively? What resources are out there now for those medical educators who are not looking to be a dean down the road or to be the head of simulation, which I feel like is the biggest bucket of educators in GI?
Yeah. So there are lots of resources. So it might just be attending an education focused conference, session, lecture, right? That are literally they sprout up everywhere. If you want to do a little bit more, there are short courses teaching, where you might just go for a couple days. If you want to do a little more than that, there are sometimes some certificate programs, which are, something less than a master's degree, usually maybe a 1-year commitment, but yet you still have something tangible to take away from that. So there's lots of ways that you can do less. And I mean, I even think there's a lot of self-education to be had, right? So, or go to the DDW, attend the Academy of Educators plenary. You'll hear a ton of really practical, useful information for the in the trenches clinical educator. So, which is what the majority of folks are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's day to day. I mean, I think the vast majority of us that work with any trainees or any students along the way are educators from the moment we walk into that hospital, to that university, to that office setting, to the moment we walk out. So any day-by-day tricks and improvements is always welcomed.
Yes. And I mean, I'll say, as you know, it's, oh my goodness, I think it's a constant learning. I mean, it's constant learning. I see folks who do things and I think, oh, wow, I wish I would have thought of that. It's a wonderful technique. And I also still, step off the curb and, unknowingly and do things that I think, oh gosh, why did I do that? I just embarrassed that, poor student who's all vulnerable. So, we all are continually learning, I guess. So.
Last but not least, where can people find you online, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram? Maybe not TikTok anymore, but anything else they can reach out to you about?
Oh, I'm such a Luddite. Maybe email.
We have singing telegrams and
Um,
Pony Express.
so,
Just
yeah,
kidding.
right? Um, I have to say that I've been slow to embrace some of the social media. Sorry, but I'm certainly very reachable, and certainly I welcome questions and be happy to share whatever I do or don't know.
Well, thank you so much for meeting with us and speaking with us about your career. It was wonderful. It was a pleasure.
It was a lot of fun to talk to both of you. Thanks.
Thanks, Sheryl. Thank you for listening to the AGA podcast. To reach us, please email us at agapodcast@gastro.org or follow us on Twitter at MJWhitsonMD, at Nina Nandi MD, and at CSCMD. Podcast production done by Resonant Recordings. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening and have a good one.